Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, my fellow participants, it's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you here for the third and the final day of the annual Conference on Cultural Diplomacy in the USA. I'm very happy that we can begin actually today's conference with two participant papers, which I think in many ways should really get the momentum going for the lectures and the panel discussions that will come later today. The first participant paper, I'm very happy, is from Judit Trunkos. Judit is a PhD student at the University of Southern California, and the topic that she's chosen is what is soft power capability and how does it impact foreign policy? And I think this is really one of the most central issues we've been dealing with in the conference as a whole. So we very much look forward to the lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a very, very warm welcome for Ms. Judit Trunkos. Thank you.
Good morning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a new way of approaching soft power, and hopefully I will convince some of you that maybe there's a more measurable way of looking at soft power. And let me just make one correction. It's the University of South Carolina. Same initials, so very close. Not close geographically. So let me begin my talk with a very brief overview of the power literature in international relations. It's extensive, so obviously I'm not going to go through all of it, but let me just point out the the process, how Joseph Nye got to where he is with his definition of soft power. I would go back to Dahl's 1961 definition of power. He understood power in terms of coercive resources. And the interesting thing that happened after that, and after that publication came out, which was Who Governs in 1961, is that people started reacting to it and started to deconstructing power and looking into it thinking, well, we think that there is more to power than just making someone do something. So that's how Bachrach and Baratz, 3 years later, published something that later became the second phase of power. And this level of power would deal with agenda setting. So we're getting into what else can you do with power other than make them do something, right? They are talking about agenda setting. And the third phase of power became known a little bit later in the 70s, in 1970, where Luke's developed this idea further and thought, well, you know what? There is also the belief shaping and preference changing influence of power. So what we see is that power is much more, or according to these scholars, power is much more than just making someone do something. It has agenda setting influences, it has preference changing influences. And this is the line of literature that Nye uses to develop his definition that we have been using. And many scholars have been developing their theories based on these three phases of power. Now what Nye is doing, and this is where I'm getting into what I would like to do with my research, is what Nye is doing, he understands power as the second, or soft power, as the second and third phases of power. And I would like to look at soft power as a first phase of power, just like Dahl did as a resource, and I will explain what I mean. Let me just briefly talk about three lines of literature that is out there. These are the skeptics of soft power. I always think that we have to be fair and mention them. Ferguson thinks that, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, he thinks that it's just cultural imperialism, it's nothing new. Gelb believes that soft power is just too broad. There is no beginning and no end. How do we define soft power? It's not clear. And the third line of literature simply believes that hard power must remain the main tool of foreign policy simply because of soft power depends too much on the foreign country and not on your own. So this is just something that is worth mentioning. So let's look at the evolution of the definition of soft power real quick. Nye in 2004 defined soft power as the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment. In terms of what these things were, he listed culture, values, and foreign policies. Now, if you look at the next definition, you will see that by 2011, he actually developed this idea further. So if you look at the 2011 definition, which is, by the way, in The Future of Power, his latest publication, he goes closer to the second and third phases of power, and he thinks that power, or soft power, is the ability to affect others through the co-optive means of framing the agenda, persuading, and eliciting positive attraction in order to obtain preferred outcomes. So you see how he's moving his definitions, he's extending it, and he's including the second and third phases of power. Just quickly, let me mention two other definitions. Chong, 2007, defines soft power as the long-term propaganda of the community discourse. And Jan Melisson in 2005 said that it is a postmodern variant of power over opinion. But pretty much what I'm trying to point out is that there are many definitions out there. Many people believe different things in power. And I would like to propose a new way that I think would be easier to measure soft power for us. Now, when I did research to find out who is researching soft power and who's trying to develop any kind of measurement of soft power, the closest thing I got to it was a research done by a British scholar, Jonathan McClory, and what he did was he compared 26 countries in terms of their soft power. Now, the interesting thing is, and I think this is where it gets confusing, is, well, of course, one of the limitations is that only 26 countries were included in the first persuader, the first study, and reading the introduction of this study, we learned that those were really strategic partners of the United Kingdom. So it's not extensive, it's not including all countries, obviously, which is something I would like to do. And if we look at the indicators, we see a little bit of inconsistency in terms of how he defines power. Let me show you what I mean. So this is the soft power index. He actually continued it, so now it's 2 years of data. But in terms of the soft power index, in terms of what he's looking at, some of the things are what I call resources and what Dahl called resources. For instance, the number of institutions or the number of tourists coming into a country, as you can see. I hope you can read it. It's kind of small. But the other line of indicators are actually outcomes, which are more the second and third phases of power. For instance, the branding of the country, like how popular a country is, or why are they deciding, like how many international brands they have, or how popular the universities are. Those are outcomes. And my argument is, I think, or definitely I would like to make the index more objective, more based on something that we can measure and compare, because it's really hard to measure how are they trying to influence other people. And really, as we heard, was it some kind of a speaker that talked about peace, or was it Jennifer Lopez, right, who actually ended up causing better relations between the two countries or building a better understanding of one country? So what I'm proposing is a more objective way of measuring soft power based on resources. So I know I don't have much time, so let me just outline the goal of this project. And by the way, I didn't mention this is my dissertation proposal draft. Those of you who are going through the dissertation process know that you first come up with the prospectus, you present it, and then you have to defend it. I'm about a year away from defending this, so I'm not presenting any findings. I'm just presenting the research design and the conceptualization of power, which I think is more objective than what we have seen before. So 3 goals with this project. I would like to clarify the definition and concept of soft power, building it on resources and capabilities, and list the indicators that can objectively measure this. My second goal is to create the global soft power index that I talked about, including all countries, not just strategic partners of certain countries. And finally, I would like to look at the foreign policies of those countries and see how much of that they actually utilize. So after looking at the soft power index and see where countries rank in terms of their soft power, see if they actually use it or they are still relying on, let's say, too much hard power. Data collection, there are many sources that I'm going through in terms of government documents, and I'm planning on interviewing diplomats, and Washington, D.C. is probably the best place to actually find diplomats, especially around embassies. Of course, I will do content analysis of government documents and things that I can find. and use existing indexes, although it's not that easy sometimes to get the entire data set, but it's worth trying. So here I would like to stop and actually encourage everyone to ask questions or comments, because I really could not think of a better place to present this than at this conference. So please feel free to take it apart, or make any comments or suggestions about what I just said, or ask anything for clarification. This is a very brief description of my prospectus, so I can answer many questions.
Thanks for your presentation. My name is Emily Blout, and I'm from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And my question for you is, you talked about soft power and gave some definitions, which I think is incredibly important. But is this a new concept? You date it back to the 60s. Is there older roots? And what's the difference between soft power and influence?
And that is what I was trying to point out, is I think it depends on how you understand power. So when you deconstruct, let's say, the definition of soft power, and you look at how different scholars look at it, you see that some people understand it as simply a resource, you make someone do something, and some people understand it as a behavior outcome, like Nye does. So it depends on who you look at, and that's really what distinguishes me from, let's say, the soft power scholarship. I would like to look at it as a resource. Now, Dahl in 1961 did not talk about soft power, right? He was talking about hard power and military weapons, and what at that time was understood in the core of realism, power is military, right? So he did not really had soft power in mind. But the reason it's important to mention his study is that he triggered others to start thinking about different levels of power. And of course, soft power I don't think it's a new concept. It has existed. It has been called many different things, and it's just developing. I think it's curious to see what it becomes. One of the goal of this study is to actually create a definition that gives us a little bit more than what Nye did. For instance, I would like to include in the definition who does what to whom. For instance, I would like to study what the governments do to people in other countries. So mine will not be on the people-to-people level. It will be government to people in foreign countries level, and the definition will include that. So I would like to be clear about who does what, and with what resources, and then the second step would be to see, okay, so are they effective with these resources, or are they even using these resources that they have? Any other questions?
I'm sorry I arrived late. I thought we were starting at 10. Are you familiar with the work of a public diplomacy scholar called John Brown?
Brown? No, I'm not.
Who
Brown.
teaches at GU here in Washington. I think you could be interested in the work he does. He works on public diplomacy, and he was a public diplomat before. So it's very interesting. One of my students wrote a PhD on public diplomacy, and he came to the conclusion that it was not very effective. I don't know how far in your studies you are, but can you say a few, maybe you said it before I arrived, but could you say a few words about the effectiveness of soft power in general, or some of these items you listed here?
Mm-hmm. Well, the goal of my study is really not to find out how effective these tools are, but rather if countries use it. So what I'm trying to do is two steps. One, create a list, a global soft power index, including all countries, even those that were forgotten before, and then look at where they rank. And then step two would be to actually see if they're using their soft power capabilities, or they're still relying on hard power. So the goal of this study is not so much is it effective, although I have a couple of ideas how we could test that, but more they have it, do they use it? And then further research can look into it, how effective it is. It's just my whole point with this presentation, and I talked a little bit about it in the beginning, is it's really difficult to prove causation. What causes another person to start liking something? That's really difficult to prove. And so I'm trying to simplify it by saying, you know what, let's look at what they have, and then let's look at what they use, and then go from there.
Take our opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to Judit Trunkos for an excellent presentation. So, thank you very much.